Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Maybe Dahlia or Doug, if you want to just give me a thumbs up to let me know that, that you're... Yes, thank you, Dahlia. So there is a view out there, it's very widespread, that only political conservatives care about constitutional text, history, and structure. A widespread view that if we take these basic elements of our highest written law seriously, they will lead inexorably, or at least most times, to politically conservative results. I'd like to give you 3 reasons for rejecting this point of view, and this is really what this new organization that's being launched today, I think, is about: a rejection of the thought that only conservatives care about constitutional fidelity, and the constitutional fidelity typically leads to politically conservative results. I want to tell you a little bit about judicial history, a little bit about founding history, and a little bit about the history of constitutional amendments, since this is an organization that's very much about history. Judicial history first. The widespread view out there is easy enough to understand. We have prominent persons on the Supreme Court today who talk about text, who talk about original intent. Justice Thomas is one of them. Before Justice Thomas, there was Justice Scalia, and they are reckoned and would probably describe themselves as conservatives. And before them, there was Robert Bork. But it is a mistake, my friends, to think that only conservatives claim the mantle of constitutional text, history, and structure. Before there was Thomas, before there was Scalia, before there was Bork, there was Hugo Black, Justice Hugo Black, who was a great progressive justice. He was appointed by FDR, FDR's first appointment to the court. He was, I think, the heart and soul, the driving force of the Warren Court, and he was a self-described liberal, an egalitarian, a progressive, and he took constitutional text, history, and structure very seriously indeed. He was famous, in fact, for carrying around with him at all times in his pocket a copy of the Constitution. I'm reaching here into my coat pocket, so you see that I'm in that tradition too. This organization, I think, is in that tradition. We care about this document, and we don't think it leads predictably or consistently to politically conservative results. The things that the Warren Court gave us as Americans: one person, one vote, an end of Jim Crow as symbolized by Brown versus Board of Education, an end to state-sponsored prayer in public schools, a constitutional procedure revolution with special emphasis on the rights of indigent defendants, as exemplified by Gideon versus Wainwright, the rights of free expression as symbolized by cases like New York Times versus Sullivan, and the application of the Bill of Rights against the states, what's called by lawyers incorporation. These are the themes of the Warren Court, and they were Hugo Black's themes. They were Hugo Black's themes before Earl Warren had even gotten on the court, before William Brennan had even gotten on the court. They were the themes of someone who was a proud constitutional textualist, a proud constitutional originalist, someone who cared deeply about constitutional text, history, and structure, and thought that it actually would often lead to more liberal, more egalitarian results. So that's the point about judicial history. Now a point about constitutional history, a point about founding history. The people who founded our Constitution were revolutionaries. They stood and understood themselves as standing at the progressive edge, the liberal edge, the egalitarian edge of the world as they knew it. And they gave America a far more egalitarian and progressive document, liberal document. They gave the world a far more liberal document, really, than it had ever seen, than the world had ever seen before. The Constitution does not begin, we the property. It begins, we the people. And the very process that generated that Constitution involved putting this document to a vote in which more people were allowed to participate than had ever been allowed to vote on anything before in human history, a vote in which in 8 of the 13 states the ordinary property qualifications were lowered or removed. exactly the opposite of what some of you may have been taught, that the Constitution was about protecting the property against the people. No, it begins "we the people" because actually it was, for its time, a strikingly democratic document, a process of not merely the votes of more people than had ever been allowed to vote on anything before in the history of planet Earth, but a robust conversation, a year-long process of continental conversation and contestation in which people were allowed to speak up against the document freely, and a remarkable example of free speech in the very act of constitutional creation. And then when you look at the rest of the text, no property qualifications to be a member of the House or the Senate or president, no religious qualifications for the presidency or any other office. These are remarkable things for their time, remarkable democratic egalitarian features. The Constitution mentions the word property, the original Constitution, only once, and that's actually a reference to government property. So the founding was far more egalitarian than we've been taught. And to be faithful to that, I think it's important to reclaim that egalitarian tradition and to recognize that the people that gave you the Constitution were the reformers of their day, who set their face against monarchy and aristocracy and tried to create a more perfect union that was also a more equal union. But alas, a flawed union, a union that was tainted by its compromise, its open compromise with slavery, and this is the third point I want to mention, and my last one. We need to attend, we who claim fidelity to this document, to the Constitution, we need to attend not just to founding history, but to amending history, the history of progressive amendment over the ensuing centuries. This is the biggest failure, it seems to me, of many of the so-called originalists on the conservative side of the spectrum. You hear a lot about the Founding Fathers, but not so much about Abraham Lincoln and his generation, the people who reconstructed a failed system, a flawed system. They don't talk so much about the progressives who gave you the 16th Amendment, that's the Income Tax Amendment, and direct election of senators and the enfranchisement of women. They don't talk about a civil rights movement in the 1960s that added new progressive texts to the Constitution. They talk too much about the founding and not enough about the amendments. This Constitution is not just about what the founders thought, but about what later generations, women alongside men, blacks alongside whites, people of all creeds, of all classes, we ordain and establish this document, we the people, but we the people have amended it, and we need to take seriously the progressive promise of those amendments. Think just for a moment about some important case about liberty or equality, some Bill of Rights case. Just think of one. I bet it's a case, strictly speaking, that's about not the founding, but the 14th Amendment. I bet it's a case like New York Times versus Sullivan, which is all about applying the Bill of Rights to the states, or Gideon versus Wainwright, which was a case about a state prosecution, or Griswold versus Connecticut, which was a case about a state that was repressive. The 14th Amendment is basically the cornerstone of most of American constitutional law. It was not the founders' idea. It was the idea of Abraham Lincoln's generation. And this organization is dedicated to the vision of the amenders, men and women, black and white, as well as the founders, because that's part of our Constitution. So just in one final sentence to bring these points together, as I pull out this copy of the document that Hugo Black kept near and dear to him, that he always kept in his pocket. This document that Hugo Black first really reminded us in the 20th century to attend to. This document is a far more liberal, progressive, egalitarian document than has conventionally been understood, whether we look at the founding and understand it in its context, or at its remarkable tradition of progressive amendment by we, the ever more inclusive and egalitarian people. Thank you very much.